KM Takhtarev Working Movement in Petersburg, 1893 to 1901. According to personal memories and notes with the application of memories of Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov Lenin in the party's split working publishing house Surf Leningrad 1924 in memory of A. Yakubova Takhtareva, my selfless friend, whom devotedly devoted her life to the cause of the liberation of the people PREDISLOVIE. The proposed book, I wrote, mainly on personal memories and notes. This book, as its main part, includes my essay on the Petersburg labor movement of the 90s. It was written in several stages under various conditions of place and time. The main part of it, describing the events of 1893 to 1897, was written back in 1897 in Vilna, where I had to stop for a while, awaiting a crossing abroad, where I was going on the advice of comrades, members of the St. Petersburg Union of Struggle for the Liberation of the Working Class, not wanting to give the best years of life to exile and preferring instead to use them to familiarize themselves with Western European social life and for their scientific preparation for further social activities. The second part of the essay, concerning the end of the 90s, was already written by me in London. The first part of the essay appeared immediately upon writing. When I arrived in Vilna, I saw that the news of the January mass strike of St. Petersburg workers had already spread throughout the province. The Vilna comrades, the future organizers of the Universal Jewish Union or the Bund, with the organization of which the St. Petersburg Wrestling Union was closely connected, bombarded me with questions both about the course of events taking place in St. Petersburg and about the development of the labor movement in St. Petersburg in general, which they contributed to the delivery of abroad literature and all other means that could. Representatives of the Polish socialist movement and the nascent Lithuanian social democracy were also interested in our movement. They all began to beg me to tell, at least briefly, the history of the development of the labor movement in St. Petersburg. And I decided to take advantage of the days of my forced stay in Vilna in order to satisfy their desire. I could do this all the more easily since I brought with me a whole series of notes and messages from workers from various factories and other materials received in the archive of our struggle union. It was decided that I would lead my story to our movement in the order of its development, illustrating its course with the materials at my disposal, picking them up properly, and two Vilnius comrades would record my story in order to immediately use it for the underground press. We gathered for this purpose, it seems, the next day after my arrival in Vilna, and every day I spent dictating my story, the result of which was the first part of my essays, embracing the period of the labor movement in St. Petersburg, at the same time as the essay was recorded, and its translation into Jewish jargon, Polish and Lithuanian with the aim of immediate dissemination of the essay in the appropriate revolutionary and working environment. I do not know about the further fate of these translations. Arriving in Geneva, I offered my essay on the St. Petersburg labor movement to the Emancipation of Labor group for publication. My essay greatly interested its members, Vera Ivanovna Zasulik, in particular. But for some tactical reasons, it was not published at that time. Later, already living in London, on the advice of my selfless friend and wife Apollinaria Alexandrovna Yakubova, who took an active part in the St. Petersburg labor movement and in the St. Petersburg struggle union, I supplemented my essay with a description of the new period marked by the appearance of working thought, and suggested it for publication by the party to Vladimir Ilyich, who had come to London for his scientific and journalistic work. But Vladimir Ilyich, who was very willing to publish my essay, suggested that I change one place in the second part of my essay, namely the place in which I spoke about the internal organizational disagreements that took place in the St. Petersburg Union of Struggle between its members at the time of the birth of the workers' thought. Vladimir Ilyich found that, although in this case the facts were presented by me correctly, but they, in his opinion, did not cover them quite right. I defended my point of view on our organizational disagreements. It ended up at the suggestion of V.D. Bonchbrovich, who worked with Posse in the last edited by the Foreign Social Democratic magazine Life published by Kulinim. I gave my essay for publication in publishing it, then incurred the strong displeasure of Vladimir Ilyich. Vladimir Ilyich could not forgive me for the fact that I, as he put it, a prominent member of the party, submitted my essay for publication to a non-partisan publishing house. As far as I remember, this first edition of my essays under the revolutionary pseudonym Petersburg appeared in 1902. The second edition was already published in Russia, where I returned from my voluntary foreign link in 1905. The second edition was published in 1906, under the pseudonym KM Tar. It was printed by the Menshevik publishing house Novy Mir, when the days of freedom of the First Revolution had already been finally liquidated in a hurry. The essays were arrested in the publishing house and the person of Comrade Alexeyev was brought to trial. Nevertheless, the publication was somehow managed to spread under the pseudonym K.M. Tar. It was printed by the Menshevik publishing house New World, when the days of freedom of the First Revolution were already finally liquidated in a hurry. The publication of essays was seized, and the publisher represented by Comrade Alexeyev was brought to trial. However, the publication was somehow distributed under the pseudonym K.M. Tar. It was printed by the Menshevik publishing house New World, when the days of freedom of the First Revolution were already finally liquidated in a hurry. The publication of essays was seized, and the publisher represented by Comrade Alexeyev was brought to trial. However, the publication was somehow distributed. Thanks to the bribe given to the bailiff in charge of confiscation, the copies of essays found in the warehouse of the Novy Mir publishing house safely disappeared during their transportation for destruction. The third edition of essays was published by the Bolshevik publishing house Life and Knowledge, V. D. Gonchbrovich, in the Memoir Library. In this edition, essays first appeared under my real name. This, Bolshevik, edition was a simple reprint of the second, Menshevik. The fourth edition was left unchanged in 1921 at the Petrograd State Publishing House. In the series Historical and Revolutionary Libraries, the present, fifth edition, printed by the Priboy Publishing House, is, in fact, a new book, in which the previous essays, which underwent some processing, were included as part of about a third of the entire work. This circumstance prompted me to change its name accordingly. January 1924 KT.